Hello, everyone, and welcome to Azure Sketches episode 2. For those of you who are new on the call and those dialing in from parts of Africa or wherever, a warm welcome to Azure Sketches. Most of you know me. My name is Lawrence Reddy. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP. And on the call today, we have fellow MVPs. So Azure Sketches is designed to help budding cloud solution architects become better cloud architects, right? It's even for experienced cloud architects to remember some of the foundational principles. And we do this by reiterating and emphasizing the core principles of cloud design, right? It's pretty consistent. So cloud design principles is like cement. And what you need to do is understand the basics of laying the right foundation, and you can build on that irrespective of what you are building in the cloud. Now, there are many principles we've covered on episode 1. Episode 1 is on our YouTube channel, and today we're going to focus on 2 of those principles: network and routing, security and isolation. Now, this session today is focused on how we can build global and secure cloud networks. And here's the key: using the most efficient PaaS services that are available. So it's not using complex ways to do it, but how can we do this using how can we do this using the simple PaaS services that are available? There are many ways to skin the cat. Today's lesson is by no means the only way to do this, but it's an easy and secure way of doing it. Today's session is focused on a fictitious scenario, and we expect it to. So everyone on this call is a cloud solution architect, right? And I'm sure everyone who's joined the session is wanting to be a cloud solution architect. And we have been tasked to connect an organization's cloud networks with their on-premise networks. They're a multinational organization, and the company is called, for want of a better fictitious company, Contoso. What we're going to do in this episode is we are going to look at the scenario, which you see on screen, and we are then going to understand the building blocks, right? How would you build how would you cater for their requirement, and how do you choose the right building blocks to do this? We're gonna talk about the scenario. We're gonna understand the building blocks. I'm gonna go through each of the building blocks. I'm gonna then switch to how will this thing connect up? How do the pieces connect up and actually work? And then what we will do to close, we will go through the Azure portal to see the different components and how to configure them. All right. So for those of you who've been on the previous episode, this is not a repeat of that session. It's a step above. So to achieve what we did in episode 1, I'm gonna now unpack the detail, precisely what technologies in Azure you can use. If you are a cloud solution architect and you are deploying and have a requirement for customers to connect up their networks, you should be choosing these technologies. And you shouldn't, if you use these technologies that I'm going to go through, you can have a customer's cloud ecosystem up and running. You'll have security that you can easily manage. You can scale accordingly. And like I said, there's many ways to skin the cat, but this is the most efficient way to do it. There's no infrastructure to manage, right? So the scenario for today: Contoso wants us to build a global network for their applications. It needs to be simple to manage. It needs to be simple to lock down. And here's the key: they want us as cloud solution architects to use PaaS services where possible. PaaS services is platform as a service. And what that basically means is that you do not manage the infrastructure or the VMs behind the scenes. That's taken care of by the respective cloud vendor, which in this case is Azure. So you're not worried, you're not managing infrastructure. If an appliance is a security, it's a firewall, you manage the rules. If something is a PaaS service is a gateway, you manage the routing rules. So, and this is key. Simplicity in itself, guys, is a fundamental success criteria if you're building these, if you want to become a cloud solution architect. So what we're going to do today is we're going to connect two cloud environments. When I say cloud environments, right, each of these cloud environments, they could be in any cloud. They could be in AWS, they could be in Azure, they could be in Google Cloud. So we're going to, for the sake of simplicity today, we're going to connect two cloud environments in Azure, and we're going to hook up one on-premises environment. I'm going to show you how you cater for road warriors, right, who might want to connect into this environment. And all of this has to be tightly secured and tightly locked down. Here is our building blocks. Some of you might be using these technologies. Some of you might have heard of these technologies, but you don't necessarily know where these things fit in. If you're on this call and you work for an ISP, or you work for a cloud services provider, or you work for an internet provider, these technologies you will most certainly come across, right? All of these are PaaS services. They are simple to deploy. They're fairly simple to configure. So let's just start off with each of these. Today's session is focusing on network and routing, security and isolation. Those are two pillars of the 7 principles we covered last week. And now I'm going to go through, well, what is the makeup, or how do you actually configure this thing? What does it look like? Azure Virtual WAN, Azure Firewall, Azure Secure Hubs, Azure Firewall Manager, Azure Front Door. Now, just remember, guys, this is not just for network people. These technologies here, Contoso wants us to secure applications, which means if you're on this call and you're a developer and you're developing something for, you're developing an application, a .NET application, or you're deploying a Node.js, or you're deploying it on containers, or you're deploying it on VMs, or you're deploying on app services, one or more of these technologies you're going to need to implement, because the application you're deploying doesn't in itself come with any security. Right? I'm gonna cover that today. So when you finish this call, you'll have a well-rounded sense of how you can use these 5 building blocks to build a solid cloud ecosystem for IaaS and for your applications, right? Your web apps. So what is Azure Virtual WAN? Azure Virtual WAN is a single dashboard and control plane for network routing and security. Not so much security. When I deploy it, you'll actually see what I mean, right? Now, it's a single place for you to configure branch connectivity, right? Site-to-site connectivity coming in from sites. Virtual WAN partner devices like SD-WAN. Point-to-site connectivity, where if someone's a road warrior and wants to connect into your network, they don't necessarily need to connect back into your on-premises network anymore. They connect into the cloud. Azure Virtual WAN caters for express route connectivity. It also does intra-cloud connectivity, transitive connectivity for virtual networks. You'll see that. I just need to lay the foundation here. You may not understand some of these, but I will explain them to you in more detail. Right? That is building block number 1. Building block number 2 is Azure Firewall. Like the name suggests, it's Microsoft's industrial strength, commercial grade, highly scalable, highly available, managed firewall. Now that's a tongueful, right? There's various ways you can deploy a firewall in Azure today. Some people deploy them as VMs, as NVAs, but Azure Firewall is a simple to use firewall that can cater for any type of scale requirement that you have. It's a fully stateful firewall as a service with built-in availability, unrestricted cloud capability, scalability. You can use NVAs, but Contoso management have mandated us to use the Azure Firewall. We do not want to manage infrastructure, which is what they say, and they don't want to be bothered with scaling. They don't want to scale this thing as they have need during the month, so we need to cater for that. Right. So what we're doing here, guys, is we're choosing the right building blocks for the business requirement for Contoso. Then we have Azure Firewall Manager. This, I think, is still preview, but Azure Firewall Manager is one control plane for it's the one control plane for network security policy and root management. And essentially what that is that you have a central point at which you can manage your configuration of your firewalls. You could be a multinational consortium. Here's they got many Azure firewalls, or they're going to have many Azure firewalls, and you don't want to be managing those rules on those firewalls. And you want to have a central place to manage it. So Azure Firewall Manager is exactly it's a single dashboard, single control plane for managing multiple Azure Firewall instances across Azure regions and subscriptions. Very important. That capability you'd need is not what's the word? It can cater for instances at a global scale. Remember, we're going back to what the requirement of Contoso is. Right. Azure Secure Hubs. It is a virtual WAN hub like this, but it is associated with routing and security policies from the Azure Firewall Manager. What does that mean? It takes a standard virtual WAN hub. That's your central point of connecting everything. And what it actually does is it can now receive policies and firewall policies and routing policies coming down from the Firewall Manager. That then turns the normal virtual WAN hub into a secure hub. All right. So a virtual hub is a Microsoft managed virtual network that enables connectivity from other resources. A virtual WAN hub is a level above that. A secure virtual hub is an Azure Virtual WAN hub with associated security and routing policies configured by the Azure Firewall Manager. Right. And when I start putting the pieces together, you will see how these relate to each other. Sorry, that was supposed to be Azure Front Door. That's not Azure Secure Hubs, Azure Front Door. So Azure Front Door is a layer 7 application firewall. Right? Traditional firewalls operate on the network layer 4. A layer 7 firewall protects your web applications against application attacks. Now, some of these application attacks can be SQL injection, DDoS attacks, cross-site scripting. So what the guys are trying to do is trying to use legitimate headers over 443 and try to get into your database layer. So layer 7 firewall operates at layer 7, and really this is designed to protect your web applications. It can do, so this is not Azure Secure Hubs, this is Azure Front Door. And Contoso have requested that we use Azure Front Door protection to protect against their front-end applications running on a VM. All right. Now, let's get going.
One quick question. So, are we going to get the recorded session or the presentation? Because how we are going to get the presentation after this meeting? Like,
we'll post it on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, so
on the GitHub group.
Yeah, so on the YouTube channel, I put a link to our GitHub repository, and that's got the slide deck there, and then obviously the video itself is on YouTube. And
okay,
then
thank you very much. Because
cool.
I'm taking notes, no, because I can stop taking notes and listen, and later I can take notes from the recorded videos. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
All right. So as a solution architect, this is your starting point. This is where I normally start. And these are just like, if you're building a house, you have to start with some basic pieces. So now we're going to build out the Contoso requirement, and we're going to start adding some meat on this. We're going to start layering upon this, right? So what we have is a single subscription, right? So we're not going to run separate subscriptions. You could do separate subscriptions, but we are going to do a single subscription, right? This is an Azure subscription. It's a single subscription, so it's going to contain all of our connectivity, our firewalls, and our gateways. The customer has requested that we create all workloads in separate resource groups, right? So remember what I said last week? Your workload will need to sit in a resource group. A resource group is a container. So these are resource groups, resource groups, resource groups, and this is one subscription, right? There's no separate subscription. And this is also a resource group. we could easily have workloads. We could easily, so these are the workload. These are the workload resource
Sorry,
groups.
I'm not able to see that mouse movement or something like that. I'm just seeing the static image, square and rectangles.
Can you guys see the
Every-
drawing?
I can see the writing and stuff on it in the
Yeah,
yellow.
that's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
The drawings is square boxes and those things. When you say resource group or subscription, we are not able to relate which box you are relating. Like,
Oh, so maybe your screen's not refreshing. So what you're supposed to be seeing on the screen is where something is a subscription. I'm writing it next to it. So you're not seeing the writing.
oh yeah, I will refresh the screen. No problem. I will do
Okay.
myself.
All right. And this will be. Sorry, your name is
My name is Fredrickson Fernandez. Yeah, thank you.
Frederick Fernandez. Hi. Are
Thank
you calling from South Africa or India?
From India. From India.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
So-
It was very pleasure. Yeah.
So Frederick, this will be on the video, right? So even if your screen is not refreshing, don't worry about it. We will get you the video.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So guys, what we have is we have one subscription, we have multiple resource groups, and we have on-premise. Now, the customer, Contoso, could have multiple sites, but we're going to go with one site at the moment. And before we break down the components of the subscription, right, we have an on-premises location where Contoso is located. Now, this could be a single site. It could have multiple. And remember, the solution is extremely scalable. What we're building here is a central hub for Contoso to connect all of their locations, all of their applications, all of their services globally, right? And what the customer has on this one premise. So let's break down the networking components here. So on premise, we have the block that the customer want to use on premise is a 192.168.1.0, right? This is a fictitious company, right? And the customer has two VLANs, right? One VLAN is the server VLAN. The other VLAN is obviously the DMZ. Most customers, enterprise customers, have many more VLANs. And you can assume that this is possibly a FortiGate firewall, but it could be any firewall. So that is the on-premise. Now let's break down the components. Let's break up the cloud into its different pieces. What we have in the cloud, in this big rectangle here, right, is the hub. Now the hub is like I said, it is the central point for all traffic coming in and out for Contoso. And what we have in the hub, right? What we have in the hub is three pieces. And I will break that down in a little bit more detail. Right. What we have, firstly, is remember the Azure Virtual WAN that I spoke about? So this is the virtual WAN. That's the Azure Virtual WAN. That's where all of the customers, that's where the customer will terminate all of his connections, site-to-site connections, all of that. What we have in the hub as well, now this is a secure hub. It's different to a normal hub. This is a secure hub, and you'll see the differences now. What we then have is the firewall. This is the Azure firewall. It's the managed firewall. None of this are VMs. This is all, right? This is all PaaS services. And what we also have is a transit VNet. Right? So we have a transit VNet. A transit VNet is where all traffic intersects, goes in and out. Now, this transit VNet block that the customer wants to use is a 10.200.0.0/24. right? Just remember, guys, like I said last week, remember that third octet. This block cannot overlap with this block, which is the on-premise block. Now, very much like the last episode, but there's something different with this configuration, right? And that is that this entire secure hub is one managed piece, right? It's not separate components. Some of these are in preview, right? It's one managed piece, which means that you can control all the routing rules that comes into the hub. You can control all the firewall rules that goes into there. And all of this is managed by the firewall manager, which we're going to see just now. Now, when you deploy a virtual WAN hub, it's not a secure hub by default. Its primary goal is to do it's to be a hub, right? It is to connect all of the connections that are coming in on premise and the virtual network connections as well. When you deploy a secure hub, the firewall is added to it, and then that firewall is managed now from the Azure Firewall Manager, which means that you can control, you have control over this entire piece, one central control plane for your network, routing, security, and all of this, right? So what we have is the secure hub, which I will show you now. Recommendation, guys, is to put that in its own resource group. And then what we have is the applications that we're gonna go through now. And inside the virtual WAN, right? Inside the secure hub, you deploy a gateway. Right? Inside the virtual WAN, you deploy the gateway. You don't manage it, right? It's managed by this. It's managed by the secure hub. It's behind the scenes. Now, network routing and connectivity is complicated enough, right? You don't want to be managing firewalls and gateways and managing those individually. What you really want is all of these things to be one service, and you do get that as a service. And this is what I'm going to take you through shortly. Let's just look at the applications that we're going to look at. So remember, I said Contoso. So this is Contoso's ecosystem, and what we have is a virtual network. This app is called. Let's just say this application is called the ERP system. Right, that's the ERP system, and that is their web application. It could be anything. So this layer here is the hub. If you notice where the hub is positioned, the hub is positioned in front of any application that Contoso will ever want to create in the cloud. So it becomes a security layer, and it also becomes a front end almost to everything, and it also is a central ingress and egress for the application. So we have the ERP. Remember what I said last week. I'm not going to labor the point. You break up your application into subnets. We have an application subnet. We have a web subnet. Same here. We have an app subnet. We have a DB subnet, right? And the IP block that we're going to use for application 1, which is ERP, and application 2, which is web, is going to be 10.200.1.x/24. Remember, guys, third octet. And application 2, web application 10. Let's just say this is a Node.js application. Could be running on AKS, could be running on containers. 10.200.2.0/24, right? And what we're going to do is we have VMs located here, multiple VMs. We've got multiple VMs located there. We've got a database located here. The database is replicated. Right. So what we have is we have our web application, we have an ERP, got myriads of those applications, right? Now, the last episode, I mentioned that if you want to connect these up, right? If you want to connect all of these things up, you've got to connect them into the hub, right? So what we're going to do, and I will show you this on the portal, instead of you going and explicitly doing the peer, right? It's pretty much the same layout as the last time. You don't need to go and configure peers anymore. This virtual WAN and secure hub does it for you. All you tell it is that you want to connect this virtual network connection. And this virtual network connection in Azure will have a name. And you say, okay, I want to connect it and I want to make it secure. And you do the same for this application. I want to connect this virtual network connection and I want to make it secure. Right. So with the secure hub using virtual WAN, you can interconnect other virtual networks. You can interconnect a site-to-site. You can interconnect a site-to-site connection. And you can also, let's just do it here. You can also connect, like I said, a road warrior. If you don't want users breaking into your on-premise, you can create point-to-site connections so that your developers that are sitting outside can get access to these applications. Remember the other rule of thumb? I said your application should not have public addresses on them. So there's no way. Let's put the internet here. Let's put the internet there. So what we don't want this scenario, right? We don't want your applications talking to the internet, because if you put a public IP address on this internet, that's exactly what's going to happen, right? So we don't want this. We don't want that. Just take that out there. Right. All of these need to be private IPs, right? Private IPs. So we've now connected these connections. This is a Azure Secure Hub, this big rectangle. It is composed of a virtual WAN, which I'll show you now, an Azure Firewall. It is a secure hub. These two VNets that's connected now are secure VNets. And what we're going to do is connect Contoso's on-premise network into the secure hub, and we do it by connecting it up using the virtual WAN. Right. So that is basically the high level how we're going to do this. Very simplified. Guys, if your designs are not simple on the initial draft, and if you don't understand it on the initial draft, do not go ahead and configure anything on the Azure portal, right? So your design needs to make sense at this very low level, so you don't miss out pieces. There's one more component to this whole thing. For your developers out there, for your application guys out there, it's Azure Front Door, right? AFD, Azure Front Door. Now, Azure Front.
One quick question, like normal. One quick question.
Sure.
Like usually, when you if you want to connect to point to site, right? We use the gateway in the subnet and register a VPN device in order to make a connection between on-premises to Azure. So in that case, if we put WLAN, we don't we record that gateway as well as the VPN device? How it replacing the existing thing here?
Okay, that's a very good. So Frederick, when I actually show you on the Azure portal, it will make sense, right? It is the same gateway. You still need a gateway in Azure. The gateway and the firewall are inside the secure hub and the virtual WAN. So all you have to do is manage the policies for routing. So you've probably deployed a gateway on its own, and that you can do. You can deploy your gateway, you can deploy a transit VNet, and you can deploy a firewall, right? And you pass all traffic from the virtual network gateway to the firewall. You can do that. This is pretty much doing exactly the same thing. But what it's doing is it's taking all of the infrastructure away. So you don't need to manage the infrastructure. All you need to worry about, Frederick, is you need to worry about the routing rules and the security policies. Because if you have 10,000 of these gateways, right? Let's just say you have multiple gateways to configure, multiple site-to-site connections. It can become a mission to manage and a mission to lock down. You always want to try to have a central control plane for routing and for security policies. But when I get to the portal, you'll see why this is beneficial over just deploying a virtual network gateway and a firewall. Okay.
Okay, what I understood, like the existing thing, how it is going to be same, like point to site or site to site, where the is in the network gateway you open from the VPN virtual network gateway, so you are going to connect. Only thing is by replacing the secure hub, it is a centralized
Yes.
object. It take care of your traffic, security rules, routing, everything, and it manages centrally. Okay, okay, great. Yeah. So nothing going to change. The existing.
Nothing changes.
Yes, I got it. Thank you.
And if you have an existing, so if you have, if you have an existing firewall connected to, if you have a distinct gateway and a firewall and a transit VNet, you can make it. So you don't just. Okay, you can also make secure VNets. You can also make VNets that are connected to firewall and gateway secure VNets, right? It doesn't need to have a virtual WAN, and I'll show you that. Anyway, let me talk about the Azure Front Door before I go into the portal. It'll make a lot more sense on the portal. Azure Front Door, remember what I said, is a layer 7 firewall. It's an application firewall. It's not a network layer 4 firewall, which is what this is. This is a layer 7 firewall, which means it's looking at your headers in your conversations at an HTTP level, your GET requests, your POST requests, all of that stuff. And what this actually does, when you use the Azure Front Door firewall with the network firewall in a layered approach, you get much more security. So let me give you an example of the use case. Imagine this was a Node.js application running on a Node.js application that's running on a web app. Most of you've got that scenario. It's not running on a VM, right? This is running on a VM. That's running on a web app. Now, you have two choices to, you actually got one choice. So what you want to do, most people, what they do is they just break internet out like this, assuming that this is secure. And trust me, it's not secure. The hackers just haven't found the need to compromise you yet. It's only a matter of time. And what you really want is to put something in front of it, right, which is the Azure Front Door. And what you do is all traffic will then ingress through the Azure Front Door. And what you do is you configure backend pools. So as long as the front door can reach this on the Azure websites.net address, right? On the Azure websites.net address, the app service only needs to receive traffic coming in from the front door. On the front door, what you will do is you'll CNAME your actual domain or custom domain, right? Your custom domain will actually be CNAMEd to the front door, right? Not naked domains. Naked domains, something that must be preceded like www. Traffic comes through. First point of entry is the front door. DDoS protection, basic protection. And then based on what policies you implement at that level, right? OWACP policies. There's actually a ton of policies. Cross-site injection protection, layer 7 protection to get into your data. But remember, these applications at some point are connected to a DB. So if your code is poor, if you're not protected against those headers coming in, a hacker could potentially gain access to your DB. By having this front door at the front, literally on the front side, protecting your apps, it protects against HTTP protocols, guys, HTTP/HTTPS. This firewall here protects you against non-HTTP protocols. This protects you against HTTP protocols. Most applications today are HTTP protocols, right? Now, what you could potentially do, and this is what I kind of recommend. So the best practice pattern is traffic comes in through the front door and is routed straight to the apps, and you have an IP access restriction on this app to say only restrict traffic from the front door. So if someone tries to get to the Azure websites.net on any other address other than the front door address, you'll get a denied error. That setting is configured on the actual application. This is a PaaS web app. It's not something that's sitting inside an ASC. It's a normal PaaS web app. So the only thing that talks to it is the Azure Front Door. The Azure Front Door data center IP addresses are available. So you whitelist your web application to the Azure front door. The Azure front door can't talk to virtual networks, right? Just remember that. The Azure Firewall can talk to virtual networks. The Azure front door does not talk to virtual networks. Here's the one other thing you can do, something I've tested. It's something I've tested and I found to work. So instead of let's just say that you have so what you can do is a public web app has got a public IP address. What you could do is you could block all traffic to that public IP address and install something called private link and private endpoint. And what that basically means is that the web application can now get a 10.200.x IP address, right? So a public web app, a public PaaS service like Azure SQL DB could get a NATed address on your VNet. And then what you do is you then say, okay, because I've got this address, now I can route to it through the firewall. So what you do is Azure front door will route its traffic through. So if you want to route to this web application, what you do is you have a DNAT rule on the Azure network firewall that says to get to 443, route that traffic to this IP address. And what happens is traffic coming into the internet has got layer 7 protection at this level and passes through the network with the Azure firewall layer 4. The advantage of that is that this has got quite sophisticated threat intelligence on it, right? So it can block malicious IPs if the Microsoft's like digital forensics, if it's global database or it's global real-time security and picks up an issue or picks up an IP address that's malicious, it would block that traffic. But this is very much a supported protocol, right? A supported standard traffic coming in through the front door, route to this application. So we've now catered for pretty much every Contoso requirement, right? Now let's look at what this looks on Azure. All of these pieces. Yeah.
Would you still suggest that in front of the Node.js application, we still have a application gateway, or would it not be needed because of Azure front door?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So Azure front door. So what Ronald is asking that so this is a global service. Azure front door is a global service. Just excuse the scratching on this board. I'm hoping you're making the message right. This is a global service. This is not dependent on any region. This application gateway with WAF policies. So if you want to protect your application, there's another way to do it. You deploy a regional service called an app gateway, right? So an app gateway is really an application load balancer, and it can do URL mapping and redirects, right? But it's at a regional level, which means you've got to deploy it for ZN North or whatever region in India. It's at a regional level. And then you could enable WAF policies on this. The WAF policies are pretty much identical to the Azure front door policies. And then what happens is that you could then say to the app gateway's public IP address, okay, route my traffic, instead of coming to the front door, route to the app gateway with a WAF configured, and then pass it through to the application. That's very much supported. What's also supported is traffic coming in through the internet through the AFD, Azure front door, and Azure front door then routes to the application gateway. That's also supported. So you have two scenarios supported. There's a third scenario where Azure internet traffic comes in inbound and Azure front door is routed through the firewall, private link, private endpoint. If you want to keep your traffic on your network, on your VNet, you don't want any traffic traversing the public internet on the public FQDN, you could route that traffic through the application gateway with an internal IP address on it. So there's 3 or 4 scenarios that you could do. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of private link and private endpoint. So private link is basically taking a public service like SQL DB, which is a PaaS service. And normally all traffic will have to traverse the internet. What it actually does is you actually create a relationship on it where it gets a local IP address, right? This is say 10.200. Let's just say, well, that's a 1.5. Now the problem with this is that your app service needs to have a DNS to resolve this thing. So what you'd need to do is you need to deploy a DNS service in here. But anyway, that's for another day. So Ronald, does that answer your question, right? There's 3 or 4 scenarios. The scenario you requested is very much a valid scenario. Internet directly to application gateway, but WAF needs to be turned on.
Okay, so with the application gateway, there is additional security. So Azure front door might not be, how do I explain, like,
so
having to go to
Azure front door Azure front door is bulletproof, right? It's protecting pretty much Microsoft services at the moment. So it's industrial strength firewall. You need to have a layered approach when you're dealing with traffic coming into your environment. Try as far as possible to have multiple layers of security, but you don't want to overcomplicate it because you have too many application gateways. The benefit of Azure front door over application gateway is that you could have multiple applications being fronted by Azure front door. It's a single point of managing that. Also, Azure front door comes with CDN support. Now, if you wanted to CDN your application, you have to configure the CDN on the application itself. If you have 10,000 applications, it gets quite complicated. But with the Azure front door, you could enable caching and it does it at the edge. So there's a lot of benefits and a lot of advantages, but they're both separate services and they do things differently. All right.
Yeah. So while we're talking about front door, one of the other things that you can do, and so like talking about the caching that you sort of get for free. For Azure DevOps, part of the reason why it's a lot faster now is when they moved over to Azure Front Door, those resources and stuff are like being cached now in South Africa, which is why when you access it, most of the site feels much faster than it used to a while back because of those resources being local. And the other interesting thing that Azure Front Door lets you do is it lets you route traffic based off the URL. So if you remember, Azure DevOps before, your account name used to be like your account name.visualstudio.com. In the background, that stuff is still running in a similar way. It's just now the routing is doing dev.azure.com/account name, but that's still routing to the same type of sites in the background because they still have the rings and everything behind the scenes. So it's not now like one big monolith app in the background. It's just the routing's all been done through rules inside Azure Front Door. The one interesting caveat with using Azure Front Door is that you now start paying for traffic, for ingress traffic as well, which before you wouldn't obviously
and the
pay for
and
that.
the policies,
the
number of policies you apply. Yeah. So use it with discretion, and I think it does have a place, Ronald, for like mission critical applications. See, not all your corporate applications would need to have CDNs, right? Or not all your corporate applications has a global reach. So stuff that needs a global reach, potentially use the Azure front door. And this is kind of what the front door does, right? It's very, very easy to configure. And I love this thing because it's such a simple thing to configure, right? What is your front end URL? So you can host multiple front end IP addresses. What is your backend pool? Your backend pool could be, look at this. Could be traffic manager, public IP address, another application gateway. You saw that, Ronald? So you could have a public IP address. You could have something hosted on premise, as long as it's got a public endpoint on your firewall. You could host that, which means that all your traffic gets screened before it hits your app services, and your routing rules determines which front end to connect to which backend pool. And like I said, you can either do redirect, forward, and there's the caching capability. By the way, guys, Azure Front Door uses the same POPs that Azure CDN uses. So that's useful. But like Gordon said, there's a cost that comes with this kind of capability. Anyway, let's just very quickly go through what the Contoso, what does it look like? So the Contoso Secure Hub, all right? So we have the virtual WAN. Now, like Frederick mentioned, you can configure a standard gateway, virtual network gateway, and you can configure a firewall. what happens is it becomes difficult to manage over a period of time. And these new services are superseding that. It's still the same conceptual routing of traffic. But I mean, already you can start to see its capabilities, right? You have the concept of a hub, and hub is like an aggregation point to kind of maybe connect regional networks or however you want to break it up. Use a VPN configuration where you can configure your road warriors coming in, your express route. You may have some site that have express route terminations. Virtual network connections. Remember what I said, guys. If you want to connect multiple virtual networks into it, it's just as easy as doing this. Choose your hub and choose your virtual network, right? Picks up the virtual network. And what it actually does, it handles the routing for you. So you don't need to go and manually explicitly peer things. I've done this a million times, and trust me, this technology is extremely useful. But there's another layer above this. You'll notice on the left-hand side, it doesn't necessarily handle security. Let's just take a VPN site. Now we connected up.
One quick question. So
Sure.
in the Azure front door, you are adding multiple virtual networks. In that way, we avoid the site-to-site or VNet peering, because the front door directly speak with any of the virtual network. Where we are placing this firewall here in between virtual network and the front door.
Yeah. So okay. So it's not the front door, Frederick. So this is the Azure Virtual WAN, right? And I'll tell you where the firewall fits. I'll tell you where the firewall fits in.
Okay.
So the front door doesn't understand virtual networks. All it does is it routes incoming traffic to your web applications, HTTP, HTTPS.
Sorry, I missed one question. Like when you say that Azure front door, it is combination of WAN as well as the Azure Firewall Manager by adding these policies and the security policy and what Azure Virtual WAN Hub does right now. It is combination of this thing only the Azure Service Copy.
Yeah. So
that case, we don't we record if we are using Azure Service. Yeah.
Yeah. So your central point of managing the secure hub is the firewall manager, right? And look at how simple it is. So you have your hubs, and inside your hub, you still got all of your configuration, right? Your hub is basically, your hub is this. Let me just take you through step by step. So your hub is a virtual WAN, right? So virtual WAN doesn't have security capabilities on its own. It is the central point to connect, to terminate all your VPN sites. If you take a look, this is one of the sites for Contoso. This is where you control all of your site-to-site connectivity coming in, right? And you can even configure primary link, secondary link, and all of that. So it's got all of that configuration in there. It can also bring in your express route configuration. So we had to create a site, right? The typical things you're going to need for a site. What is the local address block, which hub you want to connect to, and you can connect global networks into it. And then it'll ask you for what is the primary link, what is the secondary link. Now that you do on the virtual WAN hub. You need a virtual WAN hub to have a secure hub, right? A virtual WAN, you cannot have a secure hub without a virtual WAN hub, right? So you can go today and spin up the virtual WAN and get all of this connectivity, but you don't get the centralized management of security. But you do get the centralized management of network and routing. Okay, is everyone with me, right? I'm hoping you all are with me. Now we've got network and routing. So we've got the whole Contoso network configured. We've got all the virtual networks connected up together. What it does is it will then handle the routing between the virtual network connections in Azure to on-site. So if you've got sites connected, different sites globally, as long as you plug them into the hub, right, the routing will be handled automatically. So there's no real peering that you do. If I wanted to go, like I said, like I showed you, if you're going to have a virtual network connection, what it's doing in the back end is creating the hub. So now you've got a hub, right? Now you've got a hub, you've got the routing. Now you want to make this thing secure. Remember, Contoso wants security laid on it as well, but you don't now want to go and deploy a standalone firewall and now connect it to the hub. You want to be able to turn it into a secure hub. So what you do is firewall manager, and you can convert an existing hub. So if you've got an existing virtual WAN hub, you simply point it to the existing virtual WAN hub and it turns it into a secure hub. All a secure hub is, it attaches a firewall to it. If you've got an existing firewall attached to it, then that firewall comes under management. So if you've got a standard virtual WAN hub that's doing routing, but you don't have a firewall, if you convert this thing into a secure hub, you now get a firewall attached to it. Once the firewall is attached to it, I mean, these are the policies. These are the things you can do. Imagine you got hundreds of these policies. You have to associate to the hub. This is what a policy looks like. These are the rules of a policy, right? And so, what you have is three types of configuration you can do. You can do DNet, application rule, or network rule. Network rule is simple TCP, UDP, routing, traffic. An application rule, basically, you can control routing to DNS names. Like you say, okay, I've got my VNet. I've got one of my VNets in Azure. I only wanted to talk to a certain URL. You can specify the URL instead of the IP address. But remember that is outbound, guys, not inbound, right? It's not a layer 7 firewall. Even some of the documentation says layer 7. It isn't a layer 7. DNet is something you'll use often. You notice that I've actually got a rule here. I've got a 3389 rule coming in from outside, right? Coming in from outside and saying, okay, allow port 3389 to my internal IP address on the VM. The VM doesn't have a public IP address. But what I'm saying is allow that port coming in on the public IP address of the firewall. So if I do this, that's the public IP address of the secure hub firewall. And I do this. That basically is now connecting me into the actual VM. So your secure hub now is a central point to manage security to your entire environment, entire network. You have a network rule, and here is where you can configure traffic flowing from on-premise to the cloud to certain. You don't want to allow maybe certain VLANs on the on-premise network. You don't want to allow certain access to certain applications in the cloud. You'll configure a network rule to do that. And like I said, application rules is the concept of FQDN tags. If you take a look here, I'm saying, okay, fine. I want to only allow, I want to allow my VMs to talk to URLs, ports, web traffic. Remember, I said this is this component here does DNS names. What you could also do is do FQDN tags. So an FQDN tag is to say to a VM, okay, I want to talk to an Azure service, right? I want to lock down. Now, certain institutions like financial services and whatever, they don't really want the VMs talking out the internet on any port. So you have the ability to kind of lock down services while still allowing it to be able to do backups and allowing it to do Windows updates. And you get threat intelligence, right, with this firewall that comes into play. Right. If you take a look, because I made this into a secure hub, I can disengage it, right? So I can turn the secure hub off. But if I wanted to control routing, and this is an interesting page. This is an interesting page. When a virtual WAN hub becomes a secure hub, you get a little bit more control here. So what you can do is to say traffic coming in from virtual networks must always go through the secure hub firewall, right? Once it goes to the secure hub firewall, unless you have a rule in there to say work, traffic will be blocked. So you need to have one of those rules that I mentioned. This is very useful. And potentially, I haven't tested this, but traffic coming in from your branches site that are connected site to site, you can say send to the firewall. Once again, you need to have a rule that say allow it to the firewall. You can also do VNet to VNet, VNet to VNet and branch to VNet, right? So what this is basically saying is that I want to control traffic between, two VNets. So it essentially becomes a spoke. Now, by default, if you're implementing a secure hub, you're implementing something for a corporate. You wouldn't really be deploying it in a test environment. But when an organization is going to need to scale, It's very important that you realize that you need to build this capability with as little infrastructure as possible. And if you take a look here, those connections that I added, do you remember those connections? Those connections are internet secured. I can remove the internet traffic security on this. And like I said, once something is secured, unless you have a rule on the Azure Firewall, on the Secure Hub Firewall, unless you have a rule here that's allowing that traffic to exit, that is not going to that's not going to work. You can also have kind of adopting parent policies. The usefulness of having secure hubs is that if you have a firewall that's managed, so there's what you can have is the ability to centrally deploy policies across multiple firewalls in that configuration. So you're not really needing to go to each firewall and actually manage it. You also have the option, I think, Frederick, this is useful for you. You don't need to have a secure hub for it to be managed by the firewall manager. What you'd need to have is a virtual network gateway with connected to a firewall. And what you can do is you can convert that to a managed virtual network. Right. So you don't need to have a virtual WAN hub to have firewall manager manage it. You can convert an existing transit gateway. You can convert an existing transit gateway to that. So that's very useful. Very quickly before we close, it's almost 6 o'clock. We have the Azure front door. I've got my two networks in there. These two networks are completely isolated. They're not talking to each other. If you look at the peerings to this, I didn't create that peering. You see, it automatically created that peering. This is easy to do, right? You go and say peering or whatever. You've got hundreds of VNets all over the place. You want to be able to manage that from a central location, because from a security perspective, you could inadvertently peer with something you don't want and no one knows about it. Coming back to private endpoints, that's a talk for another day, but exposing a public service using a private IP, we'll leave that for another day. Okay, so let's just go back to the presentation. Right, so what you've seen today is building this network from episode 1, but you're now using building blocks that are available to use, that are simple to use, that are PaaS services. But like Gordon said, you need to do cost estimates, because the approach you might take is go with the approach that Frederick mentioned, right? Go with the standard virtual network gateway. You can choose the SKU. You can have control over that. But if you want something enterprise, and if your customer is conscious about security and all of those things, then you might want to go down this route. Are there any questions?
No questions from me.
No questions from me either, Lawrence. Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Cool. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining. And Gordon our video will be published on the YouTube channel, and we will make it available through the Meetup group as well. So if you have any questions, just pose your question on the Meetup group. But we'll see you the next time for episode 3. Cheers, guys.